Laura, hi. Can you hear me, Laura?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Okay, then it's working.
But
Can you see, I've pulled up on the screen what you sent us. Both looks like the post hoc evaluation, and then I think this is an annual report.
Yes.
Okay, great. I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's short notice, I recognize that. We're pulling together a number of strands in this P2P initiative. And one of them relates very much to the work that you're doing in the transformation project, which is why I wanted to try to share some ideas with you and to ask you to give us a little bit more of a context on how this particular project evolved for the university and how you became involved in it, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So Transformation Project actually, it's the brainchild of a donor to the University of Nebraska, Omaha. This is a person who grew up in North Omaha, and Malcolm X was born in Omaha. And so he had always kind of followed Malcolm's life, even though Malcolm's family moved out and, you know, all of the things that happened in his life. But this is someone who always kind of respected what he had done and how he had made these changes in prison. This person had some issues in their own life that they had to deal with. And, you know, as they grew and grew in their business and all of these things and wanted to give back, one of their passions is keeping people out of prison. And so he came to the university and said, if other people were able to make these changes in prison, or if Malcolm was able to make these changes in prison, other people should be able to do that as well. And so that's really how the idea for the program was born at that time. The director of corrections in Nebraska and this donor had a good working relationship, and he was very supportive of the program. And so that's how it kind of came to be. Since then, other components have developed. It did just originally run for men in general population. And since then, we've worked on building a component in restrictive housing, which is what they used to call solitary confinement. And we're working on completely redeveloping the curriculum for women, using more trauma-informed care, using female role models, those types of things. And we want to do the same thing for youth.
For youth as well, I see. And how do you define youth, Laura? What ages would be relevant here?
Yeah, so in Nebraska, the age of majority is 19. So if you are 19 when you are sentenced, you go to an adult facility. If you are less than 19 years old, you go to the youth facility. The youth facility can keep people up until age 21 if they have space and if they can. Otherwise, once you do hit 19, you are eligible to go to the adult facility.
Very good. Laura, this is Camilo Lopez Delgado, who is one of the members.
Yes.
And Camilo is joining us today. He's our lead interviewer. And Camilo's been brought into this very much at the last minute as well. So please excuse us, but we didn't want to miss this wonderful opportunity to speak with you and to share some ideas. Camilo is presently engaged at the United Nations. He's working, he'll tell you a little bit more about his work, but I think that this is a very wonderful opportunity for us to learn from your experience and to share ideas. So Camilo, why don't you introduce yourself, please, a bit to Laura, so she's aware of who we are.
Sure. Well, as the professor said, my name is Camilo Lopez Delgado. I'm a graduate student at NYU in the International Relations program, more specifically in issues of development and stuff like that. Recently, I've been an intern at the Permanent Mission of Paraguay, working with the second committee, which is more the one that does more economic and development issues, but also collaborating a little bit with the third committee, which is more human rights and humanitarian intervention.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think that's it on the introduction. But
Wonderful, Camilo. Thank you. Thank you very much. And as you can see, Camilo, we pulled up the documentation Laura's provided for us, a wonderful annual report here, which I believe this is from 2014, Laura, which is good. Gives us a little bit more recent background. What would you say are some of the highlights of the project in the time you've been involved in it?
Yeah, so I would say really figuring out how we were going to go about transitioning the program for restrictive housing. It was hard to figure that out at the time, several years ago when we started that process. Having a class, like bringing people out of restrictive housing into a classroom setting, was an absolute no. It wasn't going to happen. They didn't have any space. They didn't have the ability to do that. So we really had to work on figuring out how to make it a self-study program. And, as we were doing that, the landscape of restrictive housing, nationwide, not just in Nebraska, but nationwide, kind of shifted underneath us. And so we really had to work to figure out what the population for restrictive housing was going to look like and how this was going to work going forward. I think the other things, really taking the time to redevelop the program for women and their specific needs, youth and their specific needs. And within that, we've developed or incorporated more trauma-informed care. And I think that has been a game changer. We've also worked, another thing I think that happened this year that I think is a game changer is we've implemented what we call a facility readiness tool. We hired an outside consulting firm, and they built a tool that it's a survey tool that we run with all staff in a facility, and we get feedback from them. So we kind of know where the facility is at, things that are already taking place in the facility that would be barriers to a program's success, and things that are going on in a facility already that would be kind of enhancements or things that would help a curriculum to succeed. And so we got wonderful feedback from staff. And so we've actually taken that and been able to use that in other facilities as we're getting ready to implement there. So doing a lot of implementation on the front end, to hopefully get more staff buy-in. So those are some of the things that we've worked on the last few years.
Laura, one moment. Let me just pull this up, please. Let me just make sure that we are recording. It's correct, because normally the recording is there. No, it says stop recording, so that must mean that it is recording, because other than that, it wouldn't say stop.
Okay.
So we must.
Yeah, I can see it now, actually.
Okay, very good. All right, but thank you, Camilo. That's very helpful. We always want to make sure, Laura, that we have everything archived for our records. We study these interviews, so it's very helpful for us. And Camilo's doing due diligence to make sure I'm remembering to do what I have to do. That's always appreciated. I want to come back, Laura, a little bit more. Thank you first for explaining to us some of these more recent developments. Camilo, is that your background noise or mine? I'm not sure. Okay, all right, that's good.
Oh, that's much better.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Now, Laura, with the life of Malcolm X as a reference point, we are presently in our peer-to-peer initiative in this campaign looking at stories of what we would term disengagement. And I think that those stories are very important to highlight, each and every one, because there's much to be learned from these different stories. In the work that you do in the classroom with the Transformation Project, are there also case studies or stories that you are pointing to use as examples of the impact of this particular project, the way it's being implemented? Are there changes perhaps that are made through reference to different experiences of the project?
Yeah, so I mean, are you talking about kind of outcomes that we measure? Yeah. So we do, we go in, those are, I should have mentioned that probably when we were talking about things that we've worked on over the last few years. That's been a huge thing that we've implemented. So one of the main, the program uses motivational interviewing. Are you familiar with motivational interviewing?
Please explain a little bit more. I'm sure your way of doing it, we could learn a great deal.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So motivational interviewing is a communication style that actually it's completely participant driven. So it really works with participants to figure out what their values and beliefs are so that we know what's driving them, and then help them do some like proper goal setting towards what they say that they value and believe in. This was a technique that started out in the drug treatment world back in the 80s. But as they used it, they just realized that it could be so helpful to people in so many different areas of their life. And so it's actually in 2012, I believe it was, the National Institute of Corrections actually came out and fully supported motivational interviewing in use in facilities, and just recognizes that it can be used for so many other things outside of drug treatment. So the program is based on the fact that the facilitators need to be using motivational interviewing. So what we've done, we've taken a lot of time over the last several years to do is figure out how do we know that the facilitators are using motivational interviewing in their interactions in the classroom and those types of things, or in case of restrictive housing when they're facilitating written modules. So we've implemented kind of a top-down strategy where from the very beginning, anybody who's interested in facilitating the program fills out what we call a facilitator readiness tool. It's much like the facility readiness tool, but it just makes sure that this person really has the spirit of MI. We make sure that they go through a 2-day MI training. They go through a program training, which then puts together for them the program and how to use the motivational interviewing. And then throughout the process, we get input from the participants that leads back to whether or not the facilitator was using MI. We have a site coordinator go in and observe and make sure that they are observing them using these techniques. So we're really like setting this base, setting this foundation of using motivational interviewing. And so those are techniques that we put into place to try to measure that that's happening. Outside of that, we look at, in general population, we look at things like how many hours do they work in the facility, how many visits are they getting, and how many visits from family, because it makes a difference. We look at their misconducts before and after the program. Are their misconducts going down? Are their work hours going up? Are their family visits going up? And we do the same thing in restrictive housing, although, you know, visits and work hours and things aren't necessarily happening in restrictive housing. So that's what we're working on currently, is trying to figure out additional outcomes we can measure that will show pro-social behavior. And then, of course, we do go, we sit down with participants every so often and talk to them and get their feedback. And then, of course, right now we're monitoring all of the modules still that are coming in. So we're actually seeing their written feedback. And so we're getting a lot of good feedback that way. You can actually see people kind of progressing in their thought patterns as they go through the modules.
So essentially, how long does this type of classroom experience last? And how was it put together? So in other words, did you look specifically at the life of Malcolm X as you were designing curriculum, or how was it created?
Yeah, so it can be done in 2 to 3 sessions a week. So if you want to move through it a little bit quicker, you can do 3 sessions. Otherwise, ideal would probably be 2, because we really want them kind of thinking and working on things between classes. And then the classes run for 1.5 hours to 2 hours each session, and there are 24 sessions, so you can get it done in 12 weeks. Now for the youth, that's going to be a little, and for the women's facility, those are going to be a little different and shorter, because they're just not in the facility as long as some of the adult people. Now, of course, you have lifers, you have all of that, but in general, sentences are much shorter. People are in restrictive housing, much shorter time frames for those 2 groups. So, but that's the general idea of it. And then what was the second part of your question? How it was developed with Malcolm. Yes. So actually what they looked at first were the criminogenic factors that we wanted to touch on. So the things that you have to have in place, you know, initially as you're going back and re-entering back into the community, but even if you're not, even if you're going to be in prison the rest of your life, you still have a community there. So what do you have to have in place? You have to have housing, education, health, you know, all of those types of things. So those were the factors that we looked at. and relationships and money. So there were 6 things that we looked at, and then we pulled from Malcolm's story to figure out what that looked like in his life.
Now, do you have interns assisting with various tasks, shall we say, that need to be done in the implementation of this program? Are students involved? So Camilo, I know, for example, would be somebody who perhaps would look more into this for himself or his colleagues in his classes who might want to get some experience of this type of a program, even though we're outside of Nebraska with new technologies. Camilo wants to say something right here. Please go ahead, Camilo.
Oh no, I was just agreeing.
Okay.
I think that it's a good input for like students to look into this, like even for us outside of that general area.
Yeah.
I mean, for us, Laura, at New York University, you know, we're a global network university, and although the main campus is in New York, we now have 2 other main campuses that are being developed in Abu Dhabi and in Shanghai, and then we have academic centers throughout Europe. We have academic centers in Buenos Aires, in Accra, in Tel Aviv. So this is truly about learning for the future. We can speak about learning futures and digital innovation. And the graduate candidates as well as the undergraduate candidates are very motivated to be implicated as change agents wherever they may find an occasion to be relevant. So simply because, you know, we're speaking, as you can see through this Zoom video conference, the space idea of it is a place-making opportunity. We reach out and we want to create places for dialogue and cooperation. So that's one of the reasons why I'm asking you if these possibilities for internships exist.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have normally two grad students that work with us. One, their full 20 hours that they're available to work, and then another one that's 10. And they do most of the data collection and analysis. Because that's what they're working on, that's what they're learning. And so and that is not, statistics are not my background. So I let them do all of the heavy lifting when it comes to that. So we employ them to do it. But then on the other hand, they do a lot of some of the other administrative things for us, as well as when we were working on putting some of these tools into place. Okay, can you go out and research what are the best ways to test the use of motivational interviewing? And so they do a lot of that kind of research and background finding as well. Okay. So we definitely, so we're trying to build a model where we have one of our students that's becomes kind of expert at analyzing the data, the full-time one, and then we have this part-time one that they're kind of teaching, so that as they move through the program and we lose our expert, we've got another one right behind them that can fill in. So that's what we're trying to work towards.
Now, as I understand, these are locally based graduate candidates, I imagine at the university, in the local area. Do you foresee, looking ahead, any opportunities for graduate candidates who are, for example, in New York, who might be interested perhaps to communicate about the transformation project, make others in our local area more aware of it? Do you see an opportunity for that type of internship work?
Absolutely. And when we've looked into expanding the program before outside of the state, we didn't actually get there. We came close to expanding in Kansas, and then it didn't happen. But as we were doing that, we were trying to find grad students in the area that can go to the facilities, that can collect the data, that can do some of these things on a local level for us.
I see. Very good. And how do you communicate through social media about the transformation project? For example, things you would want the more general public to be aware of. I mean, peer-to-peer, it's all about awareness. We want to share the knowledge that we're gaining in our team with the more general public. And for example, this is a very important initiative for Nebraska. What is the possibility that this might be an initiative model for other states in the United States, or even for other countries in the world? You know, the United States has much to learn from the European counterparts, but we share ideas. And I would hope the Europeans would like to see what you're doing in Nebraska and perhaps compare notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are totally open to that. And we'd love to get to that point. I need an intern to do social media. I mean, I will tell you, that is probably our weakest. You know, our website's completely down under construction. We don't have Facebook, Twitter. We aren't communicating in the social sphere right now. And you know, we really need, that's one place where we're really far behind. And that wasn't, you know, back in the day when this first started in 2007 is when this conversation first started. That wasn't really on the radar then, and it was so local. You know, the thought that this could really be beneficial to so many other states or countries, that's only come about in the last couple of years that we could really get there. So yeah, it's become increasingly important. We just haven't gotten that far.
Camilo, please go ahead, dear.
I just wanted to ask if during when you guys were like looking at different states, do you see any like parallel like organizations, like particularly here in New York, that did similar work in a way, or not really?
There are lots of prison programs out there. The thing that I think makes our program unique is we really are trying to build in these pieces to maintain fidelity to the model, because I don't know that programming is being run to fidelity in a lot of institutions. I also think the MI piece is critical. If you're not using the motivational interviewing piece, if it's not participant driven, I just don't know that you're going to be making the change that you can. And the third thing is there just really isn't a lot of programming out there in restrictive housing. This is probably one of the only programs out there in restrictive housing.
Why is that, Laura, that there aren't more programs looking nationally? Because, you know, we're very New York based. NYU's peer-to-peer is local. However, we've always had the vision that it should be over time developed, so that New York is a microcosm. We have many, many different groups here, and therefore the need to reach out nationally and globally is very important. But you raise a very specific point. There's not a lot of programming out there. Why?
You know, in Nebraska, and I think this is going to be something you hear nationwide, is money and staffing. I mean, the one resource that Transformation Project takes is staff. I mean, you have to devote staff time to it. And just a lot of places aren't able to do that. And then especially when you get to restrictive housing, and we haven't been able to do it long enough and well enough to tell them you're actually saving by putting staff time in on the front end. You are saving a ton of staff time on the end. That's what we want to get to.
Could you explain that a little bit more? How are you saving that time?
Because misconducts are expensive. So if we just look at straight up at behavior, misconducts are very expensive. You know, when you write somebody up and then they go through an appeal process, and then by the time someone is sentenced and goes to restrictive housing, and then keeping people in restrictive housing costs a lot more money. You have more staff to run a more secure location costs more money, all of these sorts of things. So by not having people in restrictive housing in the first place, you're going to be saving time and money. Hopefully, once people finish the program and they have these goals in place, and we really want them to be working, we break their goals down into action steps that they can be using while they're still incarcerated. If they're working towards those, they should be busy doing that and working on their classes and their programs and their work that they're, have set as their goals. And they shouldn't be getting into trouble. And then ultimately, what we want is people to not come back to the facility at all.
Absolutely. Now, when we think of disengagement, right?
Yeah.
Very much of those who have learned through their own experience that there are other ways of achieving results besides, a resort to violence, besides a type of perhaps a more extremist behavior. And what we're learning from experts who have been involved in different types of programming, either with the State Department or in the case of our prison reform experts, including yourself, this type of programming with prison and prison reform. What we're trying to understand is how to communicate these experiences of disengagement in such a way that we can look to them as we think about alternatives to the vulnerability of incarceration, So in other words, alternatives for the most vulnerable that would allow them the opportunity to learn from their own experience, show others how they've learned, and in so doing become very positive, constructive members in our larger society. And I think, we're working with Enza Academy here locally in New York, thinking about how we can provide alternatives to youth in particular to incarceration. So in other words, perhaps these persons don't belong in prison. They belong perhaps engaging in community service in a way through coding, through learning different skills that can make them very, very valued members. And in so doing, they find purpose.
Yes.
They find belonging. They find a way of contributing. And in that respect, we are looking very much at this idea of the counter narrative being alternatives to incarceration, alternatives to the type of, shall we say, recruitment they might be vulnerable to, either recruitment from gangs, recruitment from white supremacists, recruitment, possibly from ISIS. We're going across the board trying to connect the dots. And I think this is why the Transformation Project is, like Enza Academy, such an important model. In your area, we have the Transformation Project. In the more, shall we say, education for minorities area, we have Enza Academy. We're looking to identify these alternatives. And that's why I'm so delighted, and I think that Camilo would share our view here, that you have agreed to be a kind of partner for us outside the New York area, thinking more nationally, because I think we have to think nationally.
Yes.
We have to think, how can we overcome these obstacles to make this type of vital programming available to more states, to more communities? How can we engage?
Absolutely.
This is essential.
Yeah, and so a couple of points there. So one of the things, especially in the women's facility, that we want to incorporate is a peer mentorship. So these women in the facility that are going to be there for a while, they go through their own MI training, they go through trauma-informed care training, they go through program training, and then they actually go through the program themselves. Then they become mentors to other women that are coming out of restrictive housing or going into the program. We really do want to build up that. And also we want to bring, eventually we do want to bring what we call alumni back to be engaged with the groups, because like you said, it's just so important to have those role models there for people. And that's why our program uses real life role models for change. This isn't some, scenario that I just made up of little Johnny got in trouble at school. These are things that happen to real people and how they dealt with them. But we really do want to build up that peer mentorship. And then some of the other things you talked about outside of the facility, alternatives, or when they get out, really, our goal down the line would be to expand this into the community so that they do have these mentors in the community and alumni that they can work with, because we know that if you come out and you go back to the same place where you live with the same friends that you had doing the same things that you were doing, you're going to end up back in the facility. So there has to be something there to help you break those habits, break that chain. And so I think that you're completely right. It needs to, certain people need to just not be going into the facility. We need to work harder once they're out on wrapping around services to keep them out. And then even before all of that, the recruitment into gangs and those sorts of things, we need to figure out what they're not getting at home. This is a conversation that we've had ongoing for a while, like what's happening in homes and things like that they're turning to these places in the first place. And so when we work with them to figure out their values and things like that, that's what we're really trying to get them to see. Because if you say that you value your family, but yet the things that your gang is asking you to do is putting you in harm's way and it's keeping you in prison away from your family, are those two things matching up? Or what you say you believe in your behavior is actually matching up with each other?
Well, I think you bring up a very important point, Laura. We had a panel, a P2P interactive panel last Friday, with Siobhan O'Neill from the United Nations University and Christina Nimmer, who is a former State Department official. And we had a very interesting discussion. It's been filmed, and there'll be various clips placed on our YouTube channel from this interactive panel. There was a discussion about the difference between disengagement and de-radicalization. And I think what was pointed out was de-radicalization is much more difficult because you're really asking people to look at their own values and to look at what drives them, what gives them in some ways a sense of identity, and to really reevaluate and reassess those values and perhaps change their values. And this is a very, very intricate and a very, very difficult endeavor. And it's one that we have to be very careful in our thinking about, because it hits right at the core for youth in particular of what makes them who they are. And therefore, that's essential, I think, that we think about this.
Absolutely. So we went and spoke with a guy who had been working through the modules in restrictive housing, and he was in restrictive housing because he was in prison for gang activity, and then within the prison he was doing gang activity. He was in restrictive housing. And so we were talking to him and getting his feedback, and he said, when I get out, I want to spend time with my kids. I want to be outside. I want to have a job. I want to do these things. But he said, I get my values from my gang. And so I don't know what to do. I mean, it's not easy. He flat out said, I'd like to change. These are the things I want to be able to do, but my value system is completely built by my gang. And so I don't know any way outside of that.
Yeah. No, it's, as you say, it's a question of how do you interrupt those cycles. And this, again, is a very, very sensitive operation, because it takes a great deal of empathy. You have to be able to understand what's motivating these persons in gangs. You have to step right into it. We viewed the film Imperium, and I think one of the things that came from this film, the character that Daniel Radcliffe is portraying, the agent who, shall we say, infiltrates this particular white supremacist group, one of the things he's encouraged is to have empathy and to really try to put himself inside the shoes of those that he's interacting with, as difficult as that might be. And it was very instructive, that film. And then we had a discussion afterwards with Michael German, and all about how he wrote the script and, what was learned from some of these experiences. And I think it's essential for our graduate candidates. As you say, this is not a scenario. You're dealing with real life people and their experiences and their lives. So we have to, beyond the scenario and into the real life, and to step into it and to really get a sense of what's driving these people.
Absolutely.
It should be about the books in the classroom, but it's also about the experience.
Yes. And so in the motivational interviewing, the basis of motivational interviewing is the spirit of MI, and that is having empathy for someone's situation. But we're really finding that it's not quite going far enough, and especially with correctional staff. I mean, the culture and the people that are employed at corrections, I mean, you're like really far behind the 8 ball here in trying to get people to see or to have empathy for the prisoners that they're working with. And so that's where we found that we needed to incorporate more pure trauma-informed care, because they're really, from our facility readiness tool, we found out that staff are not making the connection between trauma that someone has experienced in their life and the behaviors and the acting out that the staff are seeing in facilities.
So more understanding of the trauma, more understanding of where the vulnerability is coming from, and how that vulnerability can contribute to, shall we say, acting out, feeling a sense of belonging and security in gangs, or in white supremacist groups, or in ISIS. So, I mean, in this respect, we come back to empathy, and we come back, as you say, to this motivational interviewing to step in. I'd like to suggest, before we go too much further, that on the social media side, this is a mixed bag, because we know that social media is a two-edged sword. You have a lot of hate speech that's coming out of social media, sadly. You have a lot of recruitment, potentially, that could be affected through social media for those who are in that space. So we want to be conscious of the fact that in working with social media, we have a responsibility to be aware of just how potent a social force it can be. Now, I would like to volunteer. We have a number of very, very talented graduate candidates, both in residence at NYU and beyond NYU, who would be more than willing and able, if you would appreciate that, to be involved in some social media with you. So
Yeah.
something that could be helpful, I would like to say, as part of our peer-to-peer initiative, we would make available 1 to 2 interns for you to do whatever you need, and you would define it. Whatever you need would be helpful on the social media piece. And we would make that available within the next few weeks for you to consider. Absolutely. No, this is a priority. Peer-to-peer, NYU is involved now 3 semesters. We will be involved in a 4th semester in the spring. To my knowledge, one of the few, if not the only university to do this consecutive terms over a period of some 2 years. That means we have a responsibility as a university to make sure that our peer-to-peer team members are proactive. They are contributing in the ways that are most needed in our society. And from what I'm hearing from you, this could be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we should definitely continue that discussion. That'd be great. Thank you.
Excellent. Then we will be very happy to continue that discussion. I'm also very conscious of your time, and I want to be respectful of it. Camilo, do you have any questions you would like to ask Laura at this point about anything you've heard?
I think it mostly covers everything. At least I can't think of anything else in particular.
Okay. Laura, what I would like to suggest is that we take the documentation that you think would be most relevant, and we create a little section on our Esri Story Map journal highlighting the work you've been doing, highlighting the need for this work to be more widespread, first more broadly communicated in our communities, locally, nationally, internationally, and then to think about the model and to think about how this model can be relevant in other communities.
Yeah.
Because I think that in New York, we're always interested in alternative models, and we need them because New York, as you know, our area is very complex.
Yeah.
And or it's incumbent on us from within the peer-to-peer university setting to be thinking preventively, proactively about how we can learn.
Yeah.
And the model, I think we have a lot to learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. What the first thing that I'd like to make a priority is if you know any women's facilities that actually do still use restricted housing, because we've created this set of modules, but in Nebraska now we have very few women that are now placed in restricted housing long enough to complete the modules. So we're talking like 30, 60 days, something, you know, in that kind of time frame.
Okay.
And so we aren't able to validate the modules to make sure that all the activities are working and that, you know, we haven't had enough people complete to know that they're in good standing.
Mm-hmm.
So we need a pilot site. We need another pilot site.
Well, we can certainly look into that. I'm going to be speaking with Reggie Wilkinson, and I will bring this up. We will bring it up, and we will identify Pat Caruso. We'll be speaking with her tomorrow. Pat has an infinite amount of knowledge. I'm sure she could also. Brenda McGowan of Prison Fellowship. She might also.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course, Brenda McGowan, a dear friend of peer.
Yeah. So I've had some conversations with Prison Fellowship, but it happened at a time this year when things kind of were blowing up. Nebraska Corrections is a disaster right now. And so we kind of went through a period where things were like kind of blowing up and they kind of dropped off my radar. But yeah, that's definitely, would love to talk with Prison Fellowship and keep those conversations going.
Very good. Well, then we'll facilitate that as part of our peer-to-peer responsibility. And with each interview that we conduct, we'll bring this up. And we'll definitely refer them back to you. And let's see if we can identify a pilot. We'll make that a priority to identify a pilot for women, and possibly also maybe a pilot for youth.
Yes.
I think that would be helpful.
That would be helpful. We're looking to implement those modules in like January, February.
Very good.
So that would be great.
And you see, our scale up would then be January, February, because we'll continue next semester with peer-to-peer.
Okay.
So I would love for us to be able to stay in touch and perhaps follow the implementation of these new pilots.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
To what extent we can be helpful in that regard.
Yeah,
What-
and then another thing we can offer too then is we do that, and if you have students in your area, they're free to, they can use the data as secondary data, they can write reports, we can go to conferences and present those types of things. We're open to doing those types of things. So
Wonderful, and we certainly would have, I think, those who would be most interested. I can think of 2 to 3 graduate candidates already who I think would love to integrate this in their research. So I do
Awesome.
appreciate that offer from you. And it sounds like we have a number of things that we can be doing together. I'm so delighted.
yeah, well, I'm glad this contact happened.
That this has worked out. It's fortuitous. The timing is very good. And you can see Camilo is also very happy. So we're all very pleased. And
All right.
we want to thank you so much, Laura, first for sharing your experience, your insights, your time with us today.
Absolutely.
It's most sincerely appreciated, and we look very much forward to being in touch with you very soon.
Okay, great. Thanks, Colette.
My pleasure. You
Thanks,
be well
Camilo.
now. I'm going to stop the
No,
share,
thank you.
and we're going to sign off now. Be well, dear. Happy holidays.
Yes, you as well. Bye.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Thank you. Bye-bye.